So I want you to imagine this scenario because I think we have all been there. You are sitting at a bustling cafe, maybe you're traveling or, maybe you're just having coffee with a colleague.
Oh yeah, a very familiar setting.
Right. And someone leans across the table and asks you a relatively simple question in the language you've been painstakingly learning for the last year or so. You hear the words, you recognize them, and you know for a fact that you have the vocabulary to answer this. But inside your head, your brain just suddenly turns into a computer with a spinning loading wheel.
Yeah, you're just completely buffering.
Exactly. You're buffering. It takes you 3, 4, maybe 5 agonizing seconds to construct your response. And by the time you finally open your mouth to deliver your perfectly structured sentence, the moment is just gone.
The conversation has already moved on.
Yeah, the person has looked away, the topic shifted, and you're left sitting there with your words completely out of sync with reality.
It is an incredibly isolating experience, honestly. And it is the precise problem we're dissecting today in this deep dive.
Which is why I'm so excited to get into this. Our mission today is to decode the ultimate process of rewiring a human brain. We want to figure out how to stop translating and start thinking natively in a completely different language.
Right, because we are looking at some fascinating transcripts from a recent language learning discussion that focuses heavily on the exact cognitive mechanics of this shift.
Yeah, shifting from that translating brain to a thinking brain, because whether you are actively learning a language right now or you're just fascinated by how the human brain processes information, this deep dive is literally designed for you.
Totally. And that buffering feeling you described, it isn't just awkwardness, right? There's a real physiological reason it happens.
Right. It's what the source material calls mental lag.
Exactly. Mental lag. It's a literal delay in your cognitive processing.
Yeah.
When you experience that lag, your brain is fundamentally failing to operate in real time.
It's like you have the intellectual knowledge, like you've memorized the flashcards and the grammar rules.
Yes, but the retrieval speed is broken. The idea is crystal clear in your mind, but the speech delivery is just trapped behind this massive cognitive traffic jam.
It honestly reminds me of being at a live comedy show. Like, imagine you are sitting in the front row and the comedian is absolutely brilliant.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
But for some reason, you have to wear a headset and listen to a live interpreter translate the jokes for you.
Oh, that sounds awful.
Right. So the comedian delivers the punchline and the entire room erupts into laughter. The energy is electric. But you are just sitting there in silence.
Staring blankly.
Yeah, staring blankly, waiting. And then, 3 seconds later, the translation comes through your earpiece and you finally understand the joke. But the magic of that shared human connection is completely dead.
Yeah, if you laugh then, you're just the weird person laughing alone while the comedian is already setting up the next bit.
Exactly, and that captures the social cost perfectly. Conversation isn't an exchange of written letters. It's a live, rhythmic, shared event.
Timing is literally everything. When you have that mental lag, you lose the rhythm, and therefore you lose the connection.
So true. But to understand how to fix it, we really have to look under the hood at why that lag exists in the first place.
Right. The research we're exploring today breaks this down by analyzing what they call the long road of mental translation.
The long road. And let's be real, when you look at what a language learner's brain is doing in that agonizing 5-second pause, it's honestly a miracle they can speak at all.
It really is. I mean, it's doing double or triple the work.
So let's trace that pathway. Let's trace the exact pathway of that mental lag, because I think a lot of people blame themselves.
Constantly. They think they just don't have the language gene.
Yeah, or they aren't smart enough. But it's actually a mechanical issue. So someone asks you a simple question in English like, what did you do this weekend? What exactly is happening in the brain?
All right, let's track the cognitive load here. Step 1 is auditory processing. Your brain physically hears the English sounds, the phonemes, and has to recognize them as language.
Okay, sounds simple enough.
But then comes step 2, which is decoding. You take those foreign sounds and you actively translate them into your native language just to comprehend the core meaning of the question.
Okay, so I've translated it to my native language in my head, and now I actually understand that they want to know about my weekend. But that's just the intake, right?
Exactly. This is literally just the intake. Now, your executive function has to shift to output.
Right.
So step 3 is conceptualization. You have to formulate your answer, but you are building that narrative entirely in your native language.
So I'm visualizing the grocery store, the movie I watched, and I'm constructing the whole story in my mother tongue.
Yes. And then we hit step 4, which is encoding. And this is the heavy lifting. You take that native language story and you try to cross-reference it back into English.
Oh, man. So you're basically searching your mental database for the vocabulary equivalents.
Precisely. You're searching for words, you're calculating past tense verb conjugations, you're checking grammatical syntax. It is a massive task.
And then finally, step 5, I physically articulate the English words out loud.
Yep. 5 distinct, massive cognitive leaps just to say something like, I went to the store.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if I am running 2 operating systems at once, that completely explains the physical exhaustion learners feel.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you finish a 30-minute conversation in a new language, and you literally feel like you need to sleep for a whole day. Your brain is just burning through calories because of the sheer computational friction of that 5-step translation chain.
The brain is an energy hog, you know. It consumes about 20% of your body's energy on a normal day.
Wow, 20%.
Yeah. And when you force it to do double the processing for a simple task, it drains your mental battery incredibly fast.
So the fatigue isn't a sign of weakness. It's a biological symptom of cognitive overload.
Exactly. It's mechanical.
Okay, so if this 5-step battery draining translation process is the long road, the multi-million-dollar question is, what does the short road look like?
Right. How do we fix it?
Yeah, how do we bypass that translation toll booth completely so that we don't feel exhausted every time we try to order a coffee?
Or the antidote to mental lag, according to the source material, is a core concept called direct association.
Direct association. Let's define our terms here, just to be super clear. Direct, meaning no detours, right?
Right. No stopping at the translation station in the middle of your brain. No middleman.
And association simply means a neurological link between 2 points.
Precisely. So direct association is the establishment of a straight, unbroken cognitive link between an English word and its actual real-world meaning.
And I think the crucial distinction here is what we mean by meaning. You aren't linking the new English word to a word in your native language.
No, absolutely not. That is the fundamental trap that learners fall into.
Right.
You have to link the new word to a sensory reality, an image, a feeling, a memory, or a physical experience.
The source material uses the apple concept to explain this, right? Let's break that down because it really illustrates the architectural difference in the brain.
Yes, the apple example is perfect. If you are a traditional language learner stuck on that long road, and you hear the English word apple, your brain instantly fires a signal that links apple to your native word for it.
So I'm linking a sound to another sound, a word to a word.
Exactly. But if you have built a direct association, the process is entirely different. You hear the word apple, and your brain bypasses your native language entirely.
Oh, wow. So it connects the sound directly to the physical reality of the shoot.
Yes. Your brain activates the neural nodes associated with the shiny red skin. You imagine the crisp, snapping sound of biting into it.
You might even recall the specific sweet and tart taste.
Exactly. You are linking an auditory signal to a multisensory experience, not a vocabulary list.
Think about how a toddler learns, right? Have you ever seen a 2-year-old walking around with a deck of bilingual flashcards?
Never. And what's fascinating here is that is exactly the point. Children are the undisputed ultimate champions of direct association.
Because they don't have a pre-existing linguistic database to translate into, right?
Precisely. Nobody teaches them to translate.
Yeah.
When a toddler sees a furry animal with a wagging tail and their parent points and says, dog, the child does not cross-reference that sound.
They just forge an immediate, permanent neurological link.
Yeah, a permanent link between the sound dog and the living, breathing, smelling creature right in front of them.
They bypass the linguistic database completely. They experience the reality, hear the label, and boom, the connection is made forever.
That is the blueprint.
It really is. That is how every single person listening to this deep dive learned their very first language.
Yep. Every single one of us.
But for some reason, when we become adults and decide to learn English or any other language, we abandon that childhood blueprint entirely. We buy textbooks and dictionaries, and we start building these convoluted translation chains.
Well, we do it because, as adults, our brains have already built a massive, highly efficient superhighway, which is our native language.
Right. It's paved. It has multiple lanes. It's incredibly fast.
Exactly. And when we encounter a new language, the brain, which, remember, is always trying to conserve energy, instinctively wants to route all new traffic onto that existing superhighway.
Because it feels easier in the short term. It's so much easier to say, oh, apple just means this word in my language.
Right. The brain takes the lazy route.
So to gain true conversational fluency, we basically have to regress. We have to actively refuse to use the superhighway we've spent our whole lives building.
Yes. You have to go back to learning like a child, forging direct links to raw reality.
But, I mean, practically speaking, the challenge there is immense. I am an adult with a fully developed brain, a job, and responsibilities.
Right. You can't hire someone to follow you around all day pointing at objects and naming them like a parent does for a toddler.
Exactly. Which brings us perfectly into the actual actionable mechanics from the transcripts. If we know the goal is direct association, how do we physically execute that in our daily lives?
Well, to actually pull this off, you have to break it down into specific phases. And the starting line, phase 1, is what we call object labeling.
Object labeling. Okay, let's get into the mechanics of phase 1.
Object labeling is the foundational exercise. It's the entry-level mechanism for building these new neural pathways. And the mechanics are beautifully straightforward.
Okay, I'm listening.
You use your eyes and your immediate physical environment. You look at objects around you, and you name them in English, either out loud or quietly in your mind.
So if I'm sitting in my living room, I look at the flat piece of wood with 4 legs and I just say, desk. I look at the glass pane on the wall and say, window. I look up ceiling, I look down, floor.
Exactly. You are assigning an English label to a physical piece of reality in real time.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, because if I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, wait a minute. Isn't that just doing flashcards without the cards?
I hear that all the time.
Right. Why is sitting in my living room pointing at a desk and saying desk any better than the traditional method I learned in high school? You know, sitting down with a list of 50 English words on the left, 50 native words on the right, and just drilling them into my memory.
It's a fair question.
If my goal is to learn 500 words fast, isn't object labeling incredibly slow?
Well, it feels slow if your only metric for progress is the sheer volume of words temporarily memorized for a test.
But we're not talking about passing vocabulary quiz, right?
Right. We're talking about real-time, high-speed conversation.
Exactly. Let's examine why that traditional list memorization method utterly fails you when you're standing in a cafe trying to speak. When you stare at a vocabulary list, you are explicitly, deliberately engineering a translation chain in your brain.
You're taking a concept, wiring it to your native word, and then wiring your native word to the English word. Yes, it's a 3-link chain. Concept to native word to English word. And in the heat of a fast-paced conversation, that middle link, your native language, acts as a severe cognitive bottleneck.
Ah, so the chain breaks down under the pressure of speed.
Precisely. Object labeling, despite feeling simple or unglamorous, is a surgical strike against that middle link.
By looking at a physical wall, touching it, seeing the texture, and saying the word wall, you are forcing the brain to wire the sensory concept directly to the new vocabulary.
Yes, you are entirely circumventing the native language. You are breaking the translation chain before it can even form.
That makes total sense. Think of neural pathways like paths through a landscape. Your native language is an 8-lane paved highway. Traditional vocabulary lists are basically just building tiny off-ramps from that highway. You are still dependent on the highway to get anywhere.
That's a great way to put it.
But object labeling, that's taking a machete and hacking a brand new, independent trail straight through the dense jungle of your brain.
Exactly. And the first time you walk it, pointing at the wall and saying wall, it's slow. You have to chop down the vines.
But the 100th time you do it, that trail becomes a paved road as its own.
It becomes automatic. And the brilliance of object labeling is that it turns your entire waking life into a linguistic gym. It's a quiet, private game.
You can play it anywhere. You don't need dedicated study hours or a textbook.
Exactly. You are standing at a bus stop waiting. Instead of pulling out your phone and scrolling, you look around, you spot a vehicle with 2 wheels, you think bicycle.
You look at the sky, cloud, large plant, tree.
Yes. You are constantly, quietly walking that jungle path, clearing the vines, forging these direct links over and over again until they achieve what we call automaticity.
Automaticity. I love that word. It just becomes an automatic overlay on your lived reality.
Right.
But here's the obvious limitation of phase 1. Life isn't just a series of static nouns.
No, it's not.
We don't walk through the world just pointing at things like a frozen museum exhibit. Reality is dynamic. Things move. We take actions. The noun is the foundation, but to actually think in a language, we have to move to the verbs, the syntax, the flow.
Exactly. You cannot build a house with just bricks. You need the mortar to connect them. And that logically transitions us to phase 2, the life narrator.
Phase 2, the life narrator. Tell me about this.
So if phase 1 is about identifying static reality, phase 2 is about articulating the dynamic flow of life as it happens.
Okay.
This requires you to move beyond single isolated words and begin constructing full simple sentences to describe your ordinary actions.
So instead of just looking at your bed and thinking bed, you wake up and you literally become the documentary voiceover of your own life.
Exactly.
You think, I am getting out of bed, I am walking to the bathroom, I am turning on the tap, the water is cold.
Yes, you are providing a real-time running commentary on your own existence.
Which, let's be honest, feels a little crazy at first. Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you're walking around your house narrating everything you do, and there is a very specific mechanism that makes this so powerful.
Mm-hmm. And it comes down to how human memory actually functions.
Yes. Let's dig into the neuroscience here, because this is where the traditional textbook model really falls apart, in my opinion.
Well, it comes down to the difference between semantic memory and episodic memory.
Okay, semantic versus episodic.
Right. When you sit at a desk and memorize a grammar rule or a sentence from a textbook like, "The boy throws the ball," you are engaging semantic memory.
Which is what, exactly?
Semantic memory is your brain's dusty filing cabinet for facts, figures, and abstract knowledge.
Yeah.
It is useful, but it is notoriously fragile.
It's very easy to forget facts when you are under pressure.
Exactly, because those facts aren't tied to anything real. They are just floating in the abstract void of your mind.
But when you engage in phase 2, when you narrate your life, you are shifting the learning process into episodic memory.
Yes. Episodic memory is the brain's system for storing autobiographical events. It is not a dusty filing cabinet. It's a highly immersive, multi-sensory VR simulation.
Oh, wow. I love that. A VR simulation.
And the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain largely responsible for memory consolidation, absolutely prioritizes sensory data.
Right. It prioritizes the 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. So when I am making breakfast in the morning and I think in English, the screen is bright, I am taking a sip of coffee, it is strong and sweet.
You aren't just practicing verbs.
No. I am physically anchoring the syntax of that language to the feeling of the warm mug in my hands, the smell of the roast, the taste on my tongue.
Precisely. You are embodying the language. You are weaving the vocabulary and the grammar directly into the sensory processing centers of your brain.
The language ceases to be an academic subject and becomes a lived experience.
And this is exactly how we bridge the gap between conscious knowledge and subconscious fluency.
Well, help me understand that gap, because I think it's a frustration every learner feels, right? You can ace a written grammar test, meaning you have the conscious knowledge, but the moment you have to actually speak, you stumble.
Think about the process of learning to drive a manual transmission car.
Oh, that is the perfect analogy. Let's really look at that.
When you first sit in the driver's seat, your conscious mind, your executive function, is working at maximum capacity.
Right. You are hyper aware of every single micro movement. You're thinking, okay, push the clutch in with the left foot, shift the stick into first gear, slowly release the clutch while simultaneously pressing the gas with the right foot.
Wait, check the rearview mirror. Check the blind spot.
Exactly. You are calculating every variable. It is exhausting. And if someone tries to talk to you while you are doing it, you panic because you literally do not have the processing power to listen to them.
That is conscious effort. And that is exactly what translating in your head feels like. It is clumsy, it is slow, and it demands all of your attention.
But what happens 5 years later?
5 years later, you drive 30 miles to work, you pull into the parking lot, and you suddenly realize you have absolutely no memory of the drive.
None at all. Your hands and feet perform hundreds of complex synchronized spatial calculations, but your conscious mind was entirely focused on what you were going to say in your morning meeting.
Exactly. Through thousands of repetitions, the mechanical act of driving was relegated to the basal ganglia. It became a subconscious, automatic habit.
Which freed up your executive function to focus on higher level thinking.
Language acquisition requires this exact same neurological delegation. As long as you are consciously calculating grammar rules and translating vocabulary, you cannot be fluent.
Because fluency lives entirely in the subconscious mind.
Yes. Narrating your life, consistently describing your sensory reality in full sentences day after day, is how you force the language out of the conscious working memory and down into the subconscious habit centers.
You are putting in the reps so the brain learns to shift gears without thinking about it. Okay, so we've labeled our static environment in phase 1. We've narrated our physical actions and sensory experiences in phase 2. But human beings are not just physical creatures making coffee and walking to the bathroom.
No, we have a very rich, complex, chaotic internal life.
We really do. And that brings us to the hardest part of this entire process, which the transcripts call phase 3, rewiring the internal monologue.
This is where we graduate from describing the physical world to taking over the cognitive territory of the mind itself.
Wow. Taking over the mind.
Your internal monologue is that constant, unending stream of planning, analyzing, worrying, and decision-making that plays in your head all day long.
Right.
Phase 3 demands that you actively force that internal conversation to happen in English.
Which is a monumental task.
Yeah.
The internal monologue is literally the soundtrack of our existence. To change the language of that soundtrack feels almost invasive. Where do you even begin?
You begin with low-stakes, simple decisions. You don't start by trying to philosophize about the meaning of life in English.
Okay, good to know.
You start in the kitchen, you stand in front of the pantry, and you intentionally think, in English, should I eat bread or rice today? The bread is soft, but I had it yesterday. Maybe butter's a good idea.
Okay, so you are using the language to actually weigh options and make a real decision, not just describe what you are already doing.
Yes. And from there, you scale up. You start planning your day. I need to go to the supermarket to buy milk. Then I will watch an English series.
You are incrementally replacing your native language thoughts with English thoughts.
Exactly.
But here is where we hit the absolute biggest wall, and I know exactly what the listener's thinking right now.
What's that?
It's the panic of the missing word.
Oh, yes.
Let's say I am bravely attempting to plan my day in English inside my head. I'm thinking, I need to go to the hardware store to buy a grab, and suddenly my brain freezes. I do not know the English word for wrench. I just haven't learned it yet. The immediate instinct, the overwhelming, almost painful urge is to instantly snap back to my native language, say the word wrench in my head just to finish the thought, and then maybe try to resume in English later.
Because leaving a thought unfinished feels awful.
It really does.
But this exact moment is the crucible of language learning. What you do in that split second of panic determines whether you build fluency or reinforce translation.
Wow, that's a critical moment.
The research is unequivocal on this point. You must resist the urge to switch back to your native tongue. The moment you allow your native language to fill the gap, you have rebuilt the translation chain.
You've basically told your brain, don't worry, the native language is always here to rescue us.
Exactly.
So what on earth do I do? I'm standing there, I need a wrench, and my brain is empty. How do I finish the thought without switching back?
You employ a strategy known as circumlocution. You describe your way around the missing word.
Circumlocution. Okay, let's break that down.
Think of it like a detour. If the main road is blocked, you don't turn around and drive all the way home.
Right, you find a side street that gets you to the same destination.
Exactly. If you don't know the word for wrench, you use the vocabulary you do possess to describe its function, its shape, or its context.
So you think to yourself, I need to buy that metal tool used to turn things, the heavy thing for fixing pipes.
Or that green thing, the long green vegetable, if you forget the word for cucumber.
The thingamajig for the pipes. I absolutely love this because we hold ourselves to this insanely high standard of perfection when learning a new language. We think if we don't know the exact precise noun, we have failed.
But native speakers forget words all the time.
All the time. How many times a week do you point at something in your own kitchen and say, hey, can you hand me chankalid? The silver thing for the soup?
Exactly. A ladle. You forgot the word ladle, but you didn't suddenly start speaking a different language to figure it out.
No, you stayed within the linguistic ecosystem of English, and you described your way out of the problem. That what chamakali mindset is so crucial.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a fundamental truth about what fluency actually is.
Yes, let's redefine fluency right here, because most people think fluency equals a perfect, exhaustive dictionary in your head.
That is a total myth. Fluency is not about perfection. Fluency is about flow.
The cognitive agility to navigate around obstacles without breaking the rhythm.
Think of your English thought process as a river. The goal is to keep the river moving. Even if the water is not perfect, even if there's a massive boulder in the middle of the stream, like a missing vocabulary word, The river doesn't stop and flow backward.
Right. It churns, it finds a way around the rock, and it keeps moving forward.
Quitting the thought and reverting to your native language is like building a dam. It kills the momentum completely.
But navigating around the missing word, forcing your brain to quickly search its limited English database to find alternative descriptions, that builds immense cognitive flexibility.
It trains your brain not to panic when a pathway is blocked. It teaches resilience.
And resilience is the hallmark of an advanced speaker.
Exactly. The more you practice circumlocution in your internal monologue, the more naturally it will happen in live conversation. When you are talking to someone and forget a word, you won't freeze in mental lag.
You'll smoothly describe what you mean, they will supply the word for you, and the conversation will flow seamlessly. Okay, so we have built this incredible internal architecture. We are hacking paths through the jungle with object labeling. We are turning memories from dusty files into VR simulations by narrating our life. And we are keeping the river flowing by wrestling our internal monologue into English and refusing to use our native language when we get stuck.
It's a solid foundation.
But our minds don't exist in a vacuum, right? We live in a physical world full of tools, screens, and environments. And if the outside world doesn't support this fragile new internal voice, the whole system collapses.
That brings us to environmental architecture. It is the ultimate safeguard. You can do all the internal rewiring you want, but if the tools you use every day are actively sabotaging your progress, you will continually hit a wall.
And according to the source material, there is one ubiquitous tool that almost every language learner uses that is, quite frankly, lethal to the process of direct association.
Yes, the bilingual dictionary.
The bilingual dictionary. The holy grail of language apps. Literally every learner has one on their phone. How can looking up a word be lethal to the process?
Because a bilingual dictionary is fundamentally a translation machine. It is designed to reinforce the very chain we are trying to break.
Okay, explain that.
Let's say you are reading an article in English and you encounter a word you don't know. If you use a bilingual dictionary, you plug in the word and it spits out the single flat equivalent in your native language.
Right. Problem solved, right? I know what it means now.
You know the translation, but you haven't built a network. You have strengthened the long road. You have wired the new English word directly to your native language.
Oh, I see.
The solution to this, and it is a non-negotiable step for intermediate levels like A2 or B2, is making a definitive, permanent switch to a monolingual dictionary.
A monolingual dictionary, meaning if I am learning English, I use an English to English dictionary, like the Cambridge or Merriam-Webster Learners dictionaries.
Exactly. A monolingual dictionary explains English words using only other English words. There's absolutely no native language involved.
Let's look at the example of the word brave. If I use a bilingual dictionary, I type in brave, and it gives me one word in my native language. Boom, transaction complete. But if I use a monolingual dictionary, I type in brave, and I have to read a full sentence. It says, having courage, not afraid of danger, ready to face hard things.
Right.
At first glance, honestly, that seems like so much extra work just to figure out one word. Why is reading a long sentence better than getting a quick translation?
Because it forces your brain to build a conceptual web rather than a single fragile link. When you read that monolingual definition, you are not just acquiring the word brave.
You are actively encountering, processing, and validating the words courage, afraid, danger, and hard things.
Exactly. You are seeing how these words interact grammatically. You are defining English from within English.
So what does this all mean? It paints a full picture. A bilingual translation is like looking at a black and white photocopy of a painting. A monolingual definition is like looking at the actual painting, seeing all the brushstrokes and how the colors blend together.
I agree completely. It builds a massive interconnected web of English concepts in the brain, cutting the translation chain one link at a time.
You are creating a self-sustaining ecosystem of meaning in your head.
And that idea of an ecosystem leads us to the final macro-level strategy from the transcripts, creating an immersion environment.
Immersion. Okay, this is where we have to bust the biggest, most pervasive myth in language learning.
Let's do it.
The excuse I hear all the time is, I can't get fluent because I don't live in an English-speaking country. If I could just move to London or New York for 6 months, I'd be fluent. But I live in my home country, so it's impossible.
That is a fundamental misunderstanding of what immersion is in the modern world. Right. Immersion, like being surrounded by water on all sides, is not geographic anymore. It is architectural.
Interesting.
You could architect a completely immersive environment right inside your own apartment, using the technology and habits you engage with every single day. The research categorizes this into two necessary pillars: passive immersion and active immersion.
Let's break those down. What does passive immersion look like for someone who works a normal job in a non-English speaking country?
Passive immersion involves fundamentally altering the background noise and the default settings of your daily life. It means taking the device you look at 4 hours a day, your smartphone, and changing the entire operating system language to English.
Oh, that's a big step.
It is. It means curating your social media feeds so that the algorithms serve you content, memes, and news in English. Most importantly, it means creating a constant acoustic environment.
Having podcasts, talk radio, or music playing softly in the background while you cook dinner or clean the house or ride the bus.
Yeah.
I've tried this, and I have to admit, the initial pushback from my own brain was intense. If I put on an English podcast while I'm chopping onions, my brain says, "You aren't even listening. You only understood 3 words in the last 5 minutes. This is a waste of time. Turn it off."
Yeah, that's very common.
Why is my brain wrong about that? What is actually happening when I'm not actively paying attention?
Well, your conscious brain thinks it's a waste of time, but your subconscious brain is having a field day. Human brains are, at their core, incredibly sophisticated pattern recognition machines.
Okay.
Through passive immersion, your brain is engaging in a process linguists call input acquisition. Even when you are not actively focusing on the semantic meaning of every single word, your subconscious is absorbing the acoustic data.
It's acclimatizing to the rhythm, the intonation, the stress patterns, and the cadence of the language. It's exactly like listening to a complex new genre of music. Say you've never listened to jazz before and you put it on while you work. For the first week, it just sounds like chaotic noise. You don't understand the time signatures or the theory. But if you leave it playing in the background every day for a month, you suddenly find yourself anticipating the beat drops. You know when the saxophone is about to come in.
Yes, you understand the structure of the music without ever having opened a music theory textbook. Your brain just absorbed the pattern. And that is the perfect analogy. Your brain is mapping the linguistic territory subconsciously. It learns where the spaces between words are. It learns the melody of a question versus the melody of a statement.
And this passive absorption makes the actual speaking part feel much more natural later on.
It does. But, and this is a massive but, passive immersion alone will not make you fluent. It is the foundation, not the house. It must be paired with active immersion.
Active immersion. This is the heavy lifting. This is where you bring that conscious executive function back online.
Exactly. Active immersion is fully focused, deliberate engagement. It is sitting down to watch a television show in English without native subtitles and intensely listening to the dialogue, trying to catch the nuances.
It's reading a news article slowly, actively engaging with the syntax, and using that monolingual dictionary to untangle complex sentences.
Right. It is pausing to analyze why a certain grammatical structure was used.
So it's the combination of the two that creates the magic. The constant ambient background pattern recognition of passive immersion paired with the intense, focused intellectual engagement of active immersion.
Exactly. And when you surround yourself with both, your brain adapts to survive. The brain is highly adaptive to its environment.
If it realizes that its environment, your phone, your entertainment, your news, your internal monologue now demands this new language to navigate reality, it will optimize its neural pathways to process that language efficiently.
It will eventually drop the translation process entirely because translation is simply too slow and too energy intensive to keep up with a truly immersive environment.
Wow. So if we pull all the way back and look at this massive blueprint we've laid out today, we start by hacking new paths through the jungle with object labeling, breaking the translation chain at the level of the noun. We anchor the language deeply into our sensory episodic memory by becoming the life narrator of our daily routines.
Yes.
We bravely wrestle our internal monologue into English, refusing to build dams, and using circumlocution to keep the river flowing. And we surround this whole delicate internal ecosystem with the armor of monolingual dictionaries and a 247 architecture of immersion.
It is an incredibly comprehensive, airtight system.
It really is. But we have to address the elephant in the room. We have to talk about the ultimate hurdle that every single listener is going to smash into about a week from now. And that hurdle is impatience.
Oh, impatience is the great derailer. It kills more language learning journeys than bad grammar ever could.
And it is entirely natural. We live in a world curated for instant gratification. We want to download an app, click some buttons, and be fluent.
Right.
You do the object labeling game on Tuesday. You narrate making your coffee on Wednesday, and you expect to wake up on Thursday morning magically dreaming in perfect English.
And when Friday rolls around and you go to a cafe and you still feel that agonizing mental lag buffering in your head, the overwhelming instinct is to throw your hands up, quit, and say, well, I guess this method just doesn't work for me.
Yes. So how do we combat that?
The research addresses this with absolute brutal sincerity. You have to fundamentally shift your paradigm of what language acquisition actually is.
Okay.
Thinking in English is not a software update you download, is not a light switch you can just flip in your brain. It is the physical construction of new biological pathways.
So it's much closer to training for a marathon or building muscle than it is to memorizing facts for a history test.
Exactly.
Let's adapt that gym analogy because I think it makes the invisible cognitive work feel very tangible. If you walk into a gym, pick up some heavy weights, and lift for an hour, you don't walk out looking like an Olympic bodybuilder.
No, in fact, you walk out feeling worse. You feel sore.
Right. You look in the mirror a week later, and there is absolutely no visible physical change. But beneath the surface, on a microscopic level, muscle fibers have been torn and are rebuilding themselves stronger.
Neurologically, the exact same process is happening when you practice direct association. Every single time you look at a window and say the English word, instead of translating it, you are doing one mental repetition.
You are laying down a microscopic layer of myelin over that new neural pathway, making it slightly faster.
Yes. Every time you narrate your morning routine, you are completing a full set of cognitive exercises.
One workout doesn't change your body, and one day of narrating doesn't change your brain.
Exactly. But 6 months of consistent repetition, 6 months of refusing to translate, of keeping the internal river flowing, that yields a massive, undeniable physical transformation in how your brain routes information.
The mental lag will slowly shrink from 5 seconds to 3 seconds to 1 second until one day the words just appear in your mouth as seamlessly as your native tongue.
But it requires the discipline and the patience of an athlete.
It really is a profound journey. You aren't just learning a skill, you are literally physically rewiring the architecture of your own brain.
You are breaking down decades-old habits and forging completely new ones.
You are moving from the exhausting, heavy cognitive load of the long road to the immediate, vibrant sensory reality of the short road.
And you achieve it by embracing the environment around you, by taking control of the narrative voice in your head, and by trusting the immense subconscious power of your mind to absorb patterns and build automaticity over time.
It is a staggering amount to take in, but the mechanics are so clear, and more importantly, they are completely within your control starting right now. But as we wrap up this deep dive, synthesizing this massive journey we've just taken you on, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spent a lot of time today talking about phase 3, the internal monologue. That voice inside your head is the tool you use to make decisions. It is the voice you use to weigh your options, to analyze your mistakes, to plan your future. Ultimately, it is the voice you use to define your own identity to yourself.
It is the narrative core of who you are as a human being.
Exactly. So if our internal monologue is the architect of our identity, what happens when you fully, entirely switch the language of that architect?
Oh, wow.
Does changing the language of your inner narrator actually change the way you think? Does it alter the choices you make or the emotional weight of the memories you form?
That is a fascinating question.
Could rewiring the language you think in actually change fundamental parts of your personality? It's something for you to ponder the next time you find yourself standing in the kitchen, silently narrating your morning coffee.
So picture this. You are maybe at a bustling cafe in Madrid.
Or, just sitting in your home office.
Right, yeah, just in your office.
Mm-hmm.
And you are like 15 minutes deep into this really high-stakes video call with your international team.
Oh, that is a stressful situation.
Exactly. And you're listening to them speak this language you have spent years studying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for the first 10 minutes, you're basically a linguistic genius.
You feel great.
Yeah, you're tracking the syntax, you are catching the idioms, you're nodding at all the right times. You feel entirely in control.
Until you don't.
Right, because right around minute 15, your brain just It suddenly feels like a laptop spinning its cooling fans at maximum speed.
A heat literally rises in your face.
Yes, where words start blurring into this like continuous stream of noise, and your mind just violently snaps back to the easiest, oldest habit available.
Which is translating.
Exactly. You start processing the new language. You start desperately translating everything back into your mother tongue. And within, seconds, you are completely lost.
It's the classic 15-minute plateau.
And you mentioned in the notes you shared with us that you hit this exact wall, this specific plateau, over and over again. So today we are tailoring this entire deep dive specifically to solve that plateau for you.
It is an incredibly visceral wall to hit, honestly. And the most common reaction is entirely misplaced.
How so?
Well, when that mental shutdown happens at minute 15, your immediate instinct is to blame your vocabulary. You think like, oh, I need to grind through another 1,000 flashcards, or, I need to memorize more verb conjugations.
Right, I just don't know enough words.
Exactly. But what we are going to look at today, based on the framework you provided in the sources, shows that this breakdown has almost nothing to do with your vocabulary size.
Wait, really? Nothing at all?
Practically nothing. It's a biological issue of cognitive load. It's about metabolic fatigue.
Which is exactly why we are going to tear into the mechanics of this today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Our mission for the next hour or so is to fundamentally unpack the source materials you sent us on advanced language acquisition. We are going way beyond the standard, just practice more advice.
Yeah, that advice doesn't really cut it at this level.
No, it doesn't. We are going to explore the actual neuroscience and the psychology of how you force your brain to stop translating and start generating thoughts directly in a new language.
And just a quick note, the sources use English as the primary case study, but we are going to dissect the underlying mechanisms that apply to, well, whatever language you're trying to master.
Right. The notes you compiled offer this remarkably sophisticated roadmap. We're going to look closely at the biological trap of translation, how mental endurance actually works at a neurological level, and this very specific three-phase system designed to reprogram your brain's default mode network.
We'll also examine why certain immersion tools work while others just totally fail.
And finally, the psychological reframing necessary to survive the actual metabolic toll of true fluency.
Let's start right at that 15-minute wall, though.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because before we can talk about the mechanics of thinking in a new language, we have to look at why the brain so aggressively refuses to do it.
Which the sources point out in a way that seems, completely obvious on the surface, but has massive implications.
Right. The fact that real conversations are not short.
Yeah, they are long. They're dynamic, unpredictable, and ultimately deeply exhausting.
And to understand why they are so exhausting, we have to look at what is happening in your prefrontal cortex when you are operating in a language you haven't fully automated yet.
Okay, lay it on us.
Let's look at a neurological framework known as the Bilingual Interactive Activation Plus model, or BIA plus 8.
BIA plus E. Got it.
So when you are listening to that video call, your brain doesn't just turn off your native language.
It doesn't.
No, not at all. Your mother tongue is constantly active. It's constantly suggesting words, constantly trying to take over the process.
Oh, wow. So it's fighting you.
Essentially, yeah. To listen and respond in the target language, your brain has to exert massive amounts of energy to actively suppress your native language. This is called inhibitory control.
So just sitting there and listening is already burning a massive amount of cognitive calories because I'm basically holding a heavy door shut on my mother tongue.
That's a perfect analogy. You are holding the door shut, and that door gets heavier and heavier the longer the conversation goes on.
Because my arms are getting tired, metaphorically speaking.
Right. The prefrontal cortex, which handles this active suppression, burns through its metabolic resources.
Like literally glucose and oxygen.
Literally glucose and oxygen, yes. Yep. It burns through them very quickly. So when that metabolic fatigue sets in, right around minute 15, the brain kind of panics.
It needs to conserve energy.
Exactly. So it releases the door. It falls back on the pathway of least resistance. It stops suppressing your native language and starts relying on it as a crutch.
And that crutch is translation.
That crutch is translation.
And, it feels like a lifesaver in the moment. Like when you were drowning in that video call, pulling a foreign word into your native language to verify its meaning feels like grabbing onto a piece of driftwood.
It feels incredibly safe.
Right. It feels safe emotionally, but structurally, according to the notes, it is a catastrophic trap.
It really is. The moment you resort to translation, you are effectively doubling, if not tripling, your cognitive load.
Okay, let's break down the micro steps of translation here, because this blew my mind in the sources.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, when you are operating fluently, you hear a concept and you respond to the concept. It is a simple two-step process.
Right, direct association.
But when you hit that wall and start translating, look at the computational chain you are forcing your brain through.
It's rough.
Step 1, you hear the foreign audio.
Right, step 1. Then step 2, you have to hold those foreign sounds in your working memory while you actively map them to the equivalent words in your native language.
Which takes time.
It does. Then step 3, you have to conceptualize your response in your native language.
Okay, so now I know what I want to say in my mother tongue. Step 4, I have to retrieve the target language vocabulary to match my native thought.
Exactly. Step 5, you have to apply the target language syntax and grammar rules, which, likely differ entirely from your native rules.
Yeah, trying to remember where the verbs go.
Right. And only after all that, step 6, do you finally articulate the response.
Man, no wonder my face gets hot. You are taking a processor that is already blinking a low battery warning from holding that door shut, and you are suddenly running 6 background applications at the exact same time.
You are inducing an absolute bottleneck in your working memory.
Because working memory can only hold, a few things at once?
Yeah, about 3 to 5 chunks of information at a time. By translating, you are flooding that very limited workspace with 2 completely different linguistic systems simultaneously.
So the system just crashes.
It crashes. You miss the next 3 sentences, the person says, because you were busy translating the first one.
And you're completely lost. Which brings us directly to the core solution presented in the text. Mental endurance.
Right, enduring.
Because if the 15-minute wall is just metabolic fatigue, the text dictates that we have to build endurance, which it defines as the ability to keep going for a long time, even when it is difficult.
It's a great definition.
But how does endurance work in the brain? Like, if I run every day, my heart gets stronger and my muscles get more efficient at processing oxygen. Is there a neurological equivalent to that for language?
There actually is, yes. And it's rooted in neuroplasticity.
Okay.
When the text talks about building mental endurance, it's really talking about myelinating the neural pathways associated with the new language.
Myelinating.
Right. Myelin is this fatty substance that wraps around the axons of your neurons. Think of it like the insulation on a copper electrical wire.
Okay, so it protects the signal.
It protects it and it speeds it up. When you repeatedly force your brain to operate in the target language without the crutch of translation, you are firing those specific neural circuits.
Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Exactly. And as they wire together, the brain wraps those pathways in more and more myelin.
So the wire gets thicker.
Yes. The more myelin, the faster and more efficiently the electrical signals travel. They require less glucose. They require less active effort from the prefrontal cortex.
Wow, so building mental endurance isn't just like a metaphor for trying harder.
No, not at all.
It is the literal physical thickening of the neural infrastructure supporting the target language, making the whole process less metabolically expensive.
That's exactly it. It becomes physically easier for your brain to do.
The notes mention that even forcing a 5-minute internal monologue in the new language is a massive exercise for building this stamina. That makes perfect sense now.
Right. You are doing a focused, high-intensity set of mental weightlifting to force that myelination.
But recognizing that metabolic drain doesn't solve it entirely, does it?
No, it's just the first step. To actually prevent the brain from defaulting to your mother tongue, we have to look at how habits move from the conscious, exhausting part of the brain to the automatic, efficient part.
Because the ultimate goal of pushing that 15-minute threshold further and further out is to completely overwrite your brain's default mode.
Yes, the default mode.
And the sources lean really heavily on this concept. They define default as the normal setting, what happens automatically if you do not actively choose something else.
Right.
So the objective is to make the new language the strong mode, the default reaction to your environment.
And to understand how monumental that shift is, we have to look at where language actually sits in the brain.
Okay, let's look at it.
When you are learning a language, you are using declarative memory. You are consciously retrieving facts.
Like, what is the word for apple? What is the past tense of to go?
Exactly. That all happens with heavy involvement from the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. It is slow, and it requires your active attention.
But my native language doesn't work like that.
No, your native language operates on procedural memory. It runs through the basal ganglia. It is a reflex.
Okay, this reminds me of learning to drive a manual car.
Oh, that's a classic analogy.
Right. When you first sit in a stick shift, every single movement requires declarative memory and active attention. Foot off the gas, clutch in, move the stick, slowly release, gas.
You're sweating just doing it.
Yeah, you can't even have the radio on because your cognitive load is totally maxed out, just trying not to stall the engine at a stoplight.
Yeah.
But a year later, you're driving down the highway, sipping coffee, singing along to the radio, and your body is just shifting gears procedurally. You remove the active choice. You reprogrammed the default setting.
It's a really good analogy. The manual transmission works to a point because it perfectly illustrates the shift from declarative to procedural memory.
Like, I hear a but.
But here's where that analogy breaks down and why language is so much harder. Driving is a closed system.
The closed system. What do you mean?
Well, a car only has 5 or 6 gears, right? The clutch always works the exact same way. The rules of physics do not change. You master a finite set of mechanical movements.
Right. I don't have to invent a new gear while I'm driving.
Exactly. Language, on the other hand, is an open, infinitely creative system.
Oh, I see.
You aren't just learning to automatically shift between 5 gears. You are learning to subconsciously select from tens of thousands of vocabulary nodes, apply highly irregular grammatical frameworks, account for social nuance.
Which is always changing depending on who you talk to.
Right. And you're generating thoughts that have literally never been spoken before in human history. So you aren't just driving the car, you are basically building the engine while flying down the highway.
Okay, that is terrifying. But it does clarify why true automaticity feels so elusive.
It takes a lot of time.
The text says we want the language to arise as a reflex. Like, if I drop a glass on the floor, I shouldn't have to consciously choose to retrieve a curse word in English.
No, it should just happen.
The English curse word should just bypass the prefrontal cortex entirely and erupt out of me by default.
Exactly. You want to bypass the native language's lemma.
Lemma. What is a lemma?
In psycholinguistics, a lemma is essentially the abstract conceptual form of a word before it gets its sound.
Okay, give me an example.
So right now, when you see a table, your brain accesses the concept of table, the flat surface with legs. It connects instantly to your native lemma, the sound in your mother tongue, and then you have to actively drag that concept over to the new language's lemma.
Oh, I see. So overriding the default setting means drawing a direct myelinated line from my visual cortex from seeing the table directly to the target language lemma.
Yes, bypassing the native word entirely.
Which transitions us perfectly into the absolute core of the materials you sent us.
Yeah.
Knowing we need to draw these direct myelinated lines is fascinating theory, but how do we practically do it?
This is where the framework comes in.
Right. Your notes outline a highly specific, actionable 3-phase framework designed to systematically break the translation habit and build that direct association.
So let's tear into phase 1.
Yeah. Phase 1, labeling the objects around you.
Phase 1 is the foundational bedrock. It is entirely static. What the text is prescribing here is the deliberate isolation of lexical retrieval.
So what am I actually doing?
It instructs you to look at the physical items in your environment and connect them directly to the target language word, absolutely refusing to let your native language act as a bridge.
So if I am sitting in my living room, I am just scanning the space and identifying things like window, lamp, book, coffee mug.
Exactly.
I mean, I have to be honest, it feels almost too simple. I feel like a toddler.
Well, you feel like a toddler because you are doing exactly what a toddler does.
Fair point.
You are mapping visual stimuli directly to phonological sounds for the very first time, but there is a very sophisticated cognitive process happening underneath that simplicity.
Really?
When you look at the coffee mug, your native language is going to scream the native word at you.
Oh, yeah, it definitely does.
Your job in phase 1 is to practice inhibitory control. You actively suppress the native word, focus intensely on the physical properties of the mug.
Like the heat, the ceramic, the shape.
Yes, all those sensory details. And you mentally attach the English sound mug to those details. You are forcing the brain to recognize that the object itself holds the meaning, not the translation of the object.
I love how granular that is. You aren't just remembering a flashcard. You are physically tying the sound of the word to the sensory reality of the room you are sitting in.
And because it is static, because the objects aren't moving, you are keeping the cognitive load relatively low. You are only practicing noun retrieval.
Which is easier.
Much easier. But once you can reliably suppress the native language for static objects, you have to introduce complexity.
Right, which is phase 2, narrating your daily actions.
This is where we introduce verbs in motion.
The text says, as you are making breakfast, You should be thinking, I am opening the fridge. I am taking out the eggs. I'm pouring the coffee.
Syntactic processing enters the equation right here. You are moving from single nodes of vocabulary to actual grammatical structure.
Building sentences.
Yes. You are now activating Broca's area in the brain, which is heavily involved in language production and syntax. By narrating your actions in real time, you are forcing the brain to conjugate verbs, place prepositions correctly, and align the subject and object, all while tethered to a physical reality.
It's kind of like culinary school.
How so?
Well, phase 1 is just identifying the ingredients in the pantry, right?
Yeah.
You can't cook if you don't know the difference between salt and sugar.
True.
Then phase 2 is actually executing the recipe. You're physically chopping the onion, and as you do it, you are putting the ingredients together into a structured process. You are tying the mechanics of the language to concrete, undeniable reality.
That's a great way to think about it.
And if you make a mistake, you just correct it and keep narrating.
And what makes phase 2 so incredibly effective for building endurance is that the physical action drives the pacing.
Oh, because I can't pause the egg cooking.
Exactly. You can't stop and spend 3 minutes translating a thought because your hands are already moving on to cracking the eggs. You force your brain to keep up with the speed of real life. It trains your working memory to clear out the old information and process the new information rapidly.
But narrating physical actions only gets you so far, right? Like
Yeah.
human interaction, real fluency, is rarely just describing what you are doing with your hands.
Very true.
If I am on that 15-minute video call, I am not talking about cracking eggs. I am dealing with nuance, strategy, abstract concepts.
Which brings us to the final and, frankly, most brutal step of the framework, phase 3.
Switching your internal monologue.
This is where the true metabolic fatigue kicks in. Phase 3 strips away the physical environment entirely.
So no more coffee mugs.
No more coffee mugs. You are no longer relying on an object or the action of opening a fridge to prompt the language. You have to generate the target language purely from your own internal cognition. You are dealing with abstract thought.
The notes define this as holding a complex paragraph within your mind, like analyzing a problem, processing an emotion, planning a project, all entirely within the new language.
Right. And neurologically, abstract concepts are much harder to map than concrete nouns because they don't have a single universal visual anchor.
Yeah, I can easily picture an apple.
Exactly. But how do you directly map the concept of irony or efficiency or nostalgia without translating it first?
That's really hard.
Phase 3 forces you to construct semantic networks around abstract ideas using only the target language. You are sustaining a closed loop of the L2 environment entirely inside your prefrontal cortex.
This is the cognitive marathon right here. The text stresses that doing this for even 5 minutes is a massive endurance builder.
Oh, it's exhausting.
And I can see why. You are basically simulating the highest stress environment of that video call, but you are playing both sides of the conversation in your own head.
And you will feel the fatigue. Your brain will aggressively try to switch back to your native language because maintaining that abstract internal monologue is incredibly expensive calorically.
So what do I do when I fail? Because I will fail.
When you catch yourself slipping back into your native tongue, and you will repeatedly, like you said, you just gently but firmly pull the monologue back to the target language.
Just redirect it.
Yes. Every time you redirect that thought, you are laying down a little bit more myelin. You are pushing the 15-minute wall to 16 minutes, then 20 minutes, then an hour.
Okay, so we have this phenomenal escalating 3-phase system. You isolate the vocabulary, you add the physical syntax, and then you internalize the abstract thought.
It's a solid progression.
But doing this purely through sheer force of will is agonizing. So the notes pivot here to provide specific environmental tools to support this cognitive reprogramming.
You need immersion.
Yes, immersion. And the most controversial tool the text demands is the immediate switch to a monolingual dictionary.
I wouldn't call it controversial so much as, well, universally feared by learners.
Feared? Why?
Because a bilingual dictionary, typing a word in and getting the exact translation in your mother tongue is the ultimate safety blanket.
Oh, absolutely. It's so comforting.
But if we are serious about overriding the default mode, the bilingual dictionary is actually sabotaging your progress.
Wait, really? Because it just reinforces the translation trap?
It's worse than that. It prevents you from building a semantic network in the target language.
Okay, explain that.
Let's look at how memory storage works. Words are not stored in isolation in your brain. They are stored in vast, interconnected webs of association.
Like a mind map.
Exactly. When you hear the word dog, your brain simultaneously primes related nodes. cat, bark, fur, pet. When you use a bilingual dictionary, you are connecting an isolated target language node directly back to your massive pre-existing native language web. You are essentially building a bridge between two separate continents.
And every time you need a word, you have to walk all the way across that bridge, grab the meaning, and walk all the way back.
Yes, it's the bottleneck all over again.
So inefficient.
Exactly. Now, consider the mechanics of a monolingual dictionary, an English-to-English dictionary. You look up a word, say, endurance. The definition reads, the ability to sustain a prolonged, stressful effort.
Okay.
If you don't know the word sustain, you have to look that up too.
Wait, I have to stop you there. This is exactly why people hate monolingual dictionary.
I know.
Doesn't this just create a nightmare loop of confusion? You look up a word you don't know to read a definition full of other words you don't know, and suddenly you are 5 pages deep and you've completely forgotten what you originally wanted to say.
It happens.
It sounds completely counterproductive.
I get it. It is incredibly frustrating in the short term, but that friction is the exact mechanism of neuroplasticity we are looking for.
The friction is good.
The friction is necessary. By forcing yourself to stay within the target language to decode meaning, you are abandoning the bridge to your native language and forcing your brain to weave a new web on the new continent.
Oh, I see.
You are connecting target language nodes to other target language nodes. You are learning nuances and collocations that just do not translate perfectly. You are building a self-sustaining ecosystem of meaning.
And over time,
that web becomes dense enough that you don't need the native language bridge at all. The meaning is held entirely within the relationships of the target words.
the web versus the bridge. That is a brilliant way to visualize it. You are weaving a net to catch the meaning rather than walking back home to ask for permission to understand it.
Exactly. Weave the web.
And the text suggests taking this web building further through digital immersion, specifically changing the language settings on all your devices, keeping the river of English flowing, as it puts it.
Think about it. We check our phones hundreds of times a day. If your phone is in your native language, that is hundreds of micro-reinforcements of the old default mode.
That's true.
You are constantly reminding your brain that your native language is the primary operating system of your reality.
I have to be honest, I read that part of your notes and I kind of recoiled a bit.
A lot of people do.
Replacing my phone's language settings sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah.
What if I have an emergency and need to quickly navigate my GPS? What if I need to change a critical security setting in my banking app and I just don't understand the vocabulary?
Scary.
Is this level of constant, inescapable immersion actually effective, or does it just lead to severe cognitive burnout?
It's a highly valid concern, and for things like banking or medical portals, you absolutely shouldn't risk critical errors. Keep those in your native language.
Okay, good to know.
But for the basic interface, social media, your calendar, your weather app, the friction is the point. Let's look at the psychology of contextual learning. You already know how to use your phone. You have absolute spatial memory of where the settings icon is or where the reply button sits on an email.
Great. My thumb just naturally goes to the bottom right corner for a new message without me even looking.
Exactly. The function is already proceduralized, so when you change the language, you are stripping away the uncertainty of the meaning.
Oh, because I already know what the button does.
Right. When you hit the button, you know means send, and the word says submit. Your brain instantly forms a flawless phase 1 direct association. The context proves the meaning.
I don't have to look it up.
You don't. You absorb the vocabulary passively through environmental pressure. Yes, it causes minor burnout for the first, say, 3 days.
Yeah, you'll be tired.
But on day 4, your brain adapts to the new visual data, and you have passively mapped 100 new interface vocabulary nodes directly into your target language web.
You are hacking your spatial memory to install new vocabulary.
Yeah.
That is incredibly clever.
It works remarkably well.
So you use the phone to build passive vocabulary, you use the monolingual dictionary to weave the web of meaning, and you use the 3 phases to drive the cognitive engine. The mechanics of this system are, honestly, flawless.
They are very tight.
But as we get to the final section of your notes, the text takes a very grounded, almost sobering pivot.
It does. Because you can have a perfect understanding of the BIA plus model, you can map your semantic networks flawlessly, and you can still fail completely if you ignore the psychological reality of the process.
The emotional toll.
Yes.
The text states with absolute clarity that the biggest obstacle to fluency isn't a lack of vocabulary, and it isn't cognitive load. It is mindset.
A mindset is everything here.
Language learning is a profound exercise in psychological endurance. It is a very long journey. It is not a race, and crucially, there is no finish line.
That concept of no finish line is devastating for a lot of adult learners.
Why do you think that is?
Because we are deeply conditioned by our educational systems to view learning as a finite transactional process. You study the syllabus, you take the final exam, you get an A, and you are officially done.
You check the box.
You check the box. You are certified as having mastered the subject.
But fluency doesn't offer a certificate of completion.
No, it doesn't. Because language is an organic, shifting ecosystem. It evolves daily, and more importantly, your access to it fluctuates based on your biological state.
Right. Some days are just better than others.
The text stresses that you must be incredibly patient with yourself because your cognitive capacity is not static. It acknowledges that there will be days where you feel like you are flying.
Look at those days.
Days where your dopamine levels are perfectly balanced, your working memory is clear, and the L2 web feels robust and instantaneous.
You feel unstoppable. But then, there are the slow days.
The inevitable slow days.
The days where you hit that 15-minute wall at like minute 2. The days where your brain just refuses to synthesize the syntax and you feel entirely frustrated, convinced that you have lost months of progress literally overnight.
And that frustration is dangerous. The text explicitly identifies the narrative we spin on those bad days, the thoughts like, I am not good at this, I will never be fluent, I am biologically incapable of this, as the absolute enemy of progress.
It calls those negative thoughts the literal enemy, defining an enemy as something actively trying to hurt you, because those thoughts trigger stress, right?
Yes.
And stress releases cortisol.
Precisely. And cortisol severely impairs the prefrontal cortex's ability to retrieve memories.
Wow.
When you panic and get frustrated because you can't find a word, you are literally flooding the exact brain region you need with a hormone that shuts it down.
So the negative thought loop becomes a self-fulfilling biological prophecy.
You shut down your own ability to speak.
So to defeat this, the text prescribes a fundamental mindset shift. It redefines mindset as your core attitude or way of thinking. You have to consciously reframe the biological failure.
And the script it provides is so powerful.
It really is. It tells you to say to yourself, today is a slow day. My brain is tired. That is okay. Tomorrow, I will try again. I'm building a muscle, and some days the muscle is sore.
The sore muscle analogy is perhaps the most vital takeaway in the entire framework. Why do you think that specific physical metaphor is so crucial for cognitive resilience?
Because it completely neutralizes the concept of failure. It recontextualizes the pain.
Exactly.
Think about weightlifting, right?
Uh-huh.
If you go to the gym and do heavy squats, the next morning you wake up and you can barely walk down the stairs, your muscles are agonizingly sore.
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
But you never wake up, feel that pain and think, oh no, I'm terrible at the gym, my legs are broken, I'm a complete failure.
No, you recognize the pain as evidence of micro tears in the muscle fiber.
Exactly. You think, wow, I had a phenomenal workout. I am actively getting stronger. The soreness is the biological proof of growth.
The proof of work.
The text is demanding we apply that exact same logic to linguistic fatigue. When you are on that video call and your brain starts melting down at minute 15 and you feel that overwhelming wave of cognitive exhaustion, that is not a sign that you are stupid.
That's all.
That is the literal physical sensation of neuroplasticity. That is the feeling of your brain laying down new myelin. It is cognitive soreness.
If you can truly internalize that reframe, you strip the negative emotion out of the plateau. You give yourself the grace to accept a slow day because you understand the underlying biology.
Stop fighting yourself.
Right. You accept that your brain is depleting its metabolic resources to build a better infrastructure for tomorrow. You maintain the emotional endurance necessary for a journey with no finish line.
Okay, let's synthesize this entire masterclass for you, the listener, who shared these amazing notes with us.
Let's do a recap.
If you want to blast through that 15-minute wall, if you want to stop the exhausting cycle of translating in your head and keep that river of language flowing, you have to attack it on 3 fronts.
3 fronts.
First, recognize the biological reality of cognitive load. Stop feeding the translation trap because every time you cross back to your mother tongue, you are maxing out your working memory.
Second, actively construct your new default mode using the 3-phase system. Start by labeling the static objects around you to build direct lexical association.
Like the toddler phase.
Right. Then step it up by narrating your physical actions in real time to master real-world syntax.
The cooking phase.
Exactly. Finally, tackle the ultimate endurance builder, sustaining a purely abstract internal monologue for 5 minutes a day to force your brain to map complex thought directly into the target language.
And support those phases by burning the bilingual bridge. Throw yourself into the target language web by using monolingual dictionaries, and hack your spatial memory by changing the language on your phone to force daily passive immersion.
And most importantly, protect your psychology.
Yes. Expect the fatigue. Embrace the slow days. Treat your brain like a muscle, and celebrate the cognitive soreness as proof of your own neuroplasticity.
It is a profound, comprehensive system. It respects the neurology of learning while providing incredibly practical behavioral interventions.
Which leads me to a final, somewhat philosophical question I want to leave you with, based on everything we've decoded today.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
We spent this entire hour talking about the mechanics of switching your internal monologue to make a new language your absolute, undeniable default mode of thinking. But language isn't just a neutral tool for expressing reality, is it? It often shapes how we perceive reality.
Right, the theory of linguistic relativity.
Exactly. So if you successfully overwrite your default mode, how might it change the actual thoughts you are capable of having?
That's a deep thought.
If you build an entirely new, isolated semantic web in your mind, a web filled with different cultural idioms, different syntactic structures, and different emotional resonances, does changing your internal monologue ultimately weave a slightly different version of yourself?
Oh.
Does thinking exclusively in a new language make you fundamentally a new person?
That is fascinating to think about.
Something to chew on the next time you find yourself labeling the coffee mug on your desk.
Yeah.
Keep pushing the wall, keep building that endurance, and we will see you on the next deep dive.